Okay, so we're learning the Sicha. I'm gonna actually maybe share it on the page. We're learning the Sicha of I think this is how we did it. No, like this. Okay. Okay, we're learning the Sicha of Shabbos Parshas Chayei Chaf Beis Marcheshbon. Now, the reason why I don't see anything. A second. That was a bad
It's
idea.
coming. The
It's
circle's
coming.
spinning. The circle's spinning.
Here we go. Okay. So the reason why
I don't
I
see it.
I hear you see it now?
Nope. It just yeah. Now I see it. Thank you.
Okay, so the reason why I picked this sikha from the year Tavshmem Ches, which is the end of 1987, is because very few of the Parshas Chaisar are not Shabbos Mevarchim. It's very rare that Shabbos Chaisar will not be the month we bless the Shabbos we bless the new moon. Sorry, Sharon, I'm gonna put you on mute. It's coming over some sound. Okay, so the sikha says like this: on the pasuk of Vayi Chaisar Meir Shana v'Esrim Shana v'Sheva Shanim. Shnei Chayei. That's how the parsha opens up. So on the life of Sarah was 127 years. Nevar b'dirushay Chasidus. It says in the teachings of Chasidus, Kol miyuchad dirushay Bal Yom Miladus L'Chaf Marcheshbon. Now we're tonight is still we're the end of the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe Chabad of Shalom Dov Ber Shnerson. So the Rebbe is the Shabbos afterwards, like this year, is the 22nd of Marcheshbon. Is still in the days of celebrating the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab. Asher B'Shana Zu, this year, meaning the year of Tavshemem Ches, 1988, is Nishlama Kuf Chav Zayin Shana Shla. He completes the 127th year of his life. Means if you're counting his birthday still going, even though he passed away well before that, he passed away in the 60s or when he was 60. So we're still we're still celebrating his birthday. That would be the year 127, which is corresponding to the 127 years of Sarah. Shemer Shana Kai Al B'chinas Ratzin V'Tainig. We know that the concept in Chassidus it explains that the idea of 100 years is that you've reached the level of Ratzain, the want. What is the want? What do I really want? It's not what I understand. It's the Ratzain is higher than Chachma, higher than understanding, and Tainug and the pleasure, which motivates the want. When you take a pleasure in something, and you like something, that creates a want, and when you create a want, then you create a strategy which starts with Chachma, which starts with understanding, with wisdom. So it says that Esrim Shana, that's 100 years. What's 20 years? That's when Sarah mastered her intellectual capabilities, which is the 10 times 2 is 20. First 10 is Chachma, the second one is Bina. And then he says, B'Sheva Shanim, what is the 7 years? That she also mastered her attributes, her emotional makeup. So she was totally complete in the ratzin, in the want, and in the intellect and in the emotion. She was emotionally and intellectually, and even on a level of ratzin and tainung and pleasure, she was totally complete. So therefore, the 127 years of Sarah's life represents a person who's complete. Means you completed on all levels of, again, emotionally, intellectually, and even in your ratzin and your want and pleasure. She's a complete person. That's a complete number. The kol koyches nefesh and all the functionalities of the soul. Hein koyches hamakifim, whether it's the accompanying energy, which is ratzin and tainig, which is the want and the pleasure. The hein koyches pnimim, and also the internal qualities of the functionality of the soul, which is ma'achim midas, intellect and emotions. Shebekulim nasis avoid b'tachas hashlemus. That in all of them, she did her service in a complete way. Kulan shavim l'tayva, like Rashi says. All of them are complete, all of them are good. So what does this all mean to us? That Sarah lived so complete, that in all her makeup and her encompassing and internal energy, she was totally complete to Hashem. This is a lesson to every man and woman of Israel. An everlasting lesson. In all times. A person can't say, well, I don't live in the days of Sarah, etc. But Gashi Sarah, the Rebbe says to emphasize, like we learned last week, when we read about it, when we read that this is the life of Sarah, the Shabbos that we read about it, that we read that what do we take from this? That our service of Hashem has to penetrate and permeate through all our soul's capabilities, meaning to say, Ratzein, Tainig, our want, our pleasure, our intellect, our midos, that all of them are complete and all of them are good. But Pratyas Yaisa, the Rebbe says more. Not that we could look back and say that our entire life in general, after 120 years, 127 years was complete, but you were complete in every single day. And everything we do it complete. Throughout the day. The Rebbe gives an example. What does it mean to do something complete? When a person wakes up, and contemplates for a second, that God is standing over you. Recognizing, when you say you're not just saying it, you're not mouthing it, you're not just feeling it, you're not just understanding it, but it hits all the way to your ruts and to your want and to your pleasure. This is what you are. What does it mean? What does it mean when an idea like this reaches your want and your pleasure? This is who you are. This is what you take pleasure in, knowing that Hashem is standing over you and saying Modani. Turning to the page 85. And so that starts off in the morning with the first thing we do. And so through the entire day, throughout the day, and every single day, every day of your life. When you read it, not just think it, and you read it, you realize what we're really praising Sarah about. That's what it means. You have complete days. That's really all the Maimarim of Torah for this week talks about the completion of a person's service of Hashem. Yamin Shleimim, complete days. Viserim is more than that. Shekulan Shavim L'Taiva, not just complete, but they all are good days. And you can have days that are complete that may not be good. So they have to be good days. As each Jew, man and woman has inherited from our father and our mother, Avram and Sarah. The first of the fathers, V'imois, and the mothers. The Kol Echad Yisrael of every single Jewish person. As we spoke, the Shabbos before that year, 1987, 88, Tavshim Memches, on a guest Parshas Chayei, Parshas Vayera. Omnam. Adayin Tzarech Lahavin. A person has to understand. Aleph 1. Milas Hashleimus the Kuf Chav Zayin He the Pashtus Gam Eitzel Kol HaTzadikim. If you're saying that the idea of 127 represents a completion in your pleasure, want, intellect, and emotions, so we have to say that it's not something unique to Sarah. Every tzaddik, otherwise that wouldn't be a tzaddik. V'achidish to Sarah she'etzla ba zeh begili gam bizman gashmi. The difference in Sarah, we could say, is that Sarah, every tzaddik has it, but in Sarah, it was in her life. We see it in her years, that she lived in corresponding to that years, which is 127. That it expressed itself in her actually days that she lived. If every tzaddik has this completion of 127, which represents your completion in your avod and everything you do, so why did it represent itself in the life of Sarah, not in the life of Avram, who lived 175 years? That's question number one. Question number two. Hapasik, Sarah, who Pashas Hagdama, the pasuk Shlachro. So seemingly the opening verse of this week's parsha, which talks about the life of Sarah, is to go to the next verse. What's the next verse? Vatama Sarah, that after 127 years she dies. And after she dies, we talk about the details of her burial and Avram buying the land, etc., for her to be buried. And from there we go on to the continuation of this of the happenings of this week's parsha, which is the job that Avram assigned to his servant Eliezer to go find a wife for Yitzchak by Rivka. Until they actually get married. Like it says, he brought her to his mother's tent, and he was able to console himself after the death of his mother by marrying Rivka. So he says, and these are all things that happen after Sarah dies. So the Rebbe is seeming to, what's the Rebbe asking here? If everything's exact, how is it possible? How could we say that when we want to talk about the completion of someone, it should be following a conversation about their life, not about that's only the opening verse talks about her life, And from the second verse onwards, it talks about her death and the happenings that happen after she lives. She first her burial, and then the marriage and the ability for her son to become married through the job of Eliezer to go find a wife. So how can you say that's Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah? It's all talking about after the life of Sarah. The whole happenings of the parsha is talking about things that happen after the life of Sarah. And all these things happen in the parsha that's named the life of Sarah, which is all things that are happening after life. I've asked this question many times. So we could say, what's the idea like this? What is the difference in the service of Avram and Sarah and their character and how they were? Avram was above the world. This is one of the fundamental teachings of Chassidus about the difference between Avram and Sarah. Avram, before he got the Hay in his name, when he was only a four-lettered name of Aleph Beis Reish Mem, who Sicho, like we learned in Likutei Torah and Tarar, who Sicho Nel Mikol Rayin. He's the idea that's beyond any understanding, beyond any kind of comprehension. That's how deep his intellect is. So he's withdrawn within himself. Vilu Sarah, Bechinas Nukva, Sarah, who's the female. Malchus, which is kingship, which that's the attributes of kingship is a female. Is Sharish Bechinas as man is Makam. She's in time and place. She's not beyond the world. Hold on, Aaron. She's within the world. Gedrei Oilam, within the limitations of the world. In Yana, her job is Lahamshich, to bring down, lifel, to affect. As in Yana Shal Avram, Begidrei Oilam Davka. She brings Avram down to the world. Because Avram himself is Seichel Ram, he's above the world. Sarah takes Avram and brings him to the world. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, you said this is a fundamental teaching of Hasidus, but I'm thinking you're saying of the Hasidic movement, isn't it a fundamental teaching of all Jews?
No, yes, I'm not talking about teaching in a way of exclusive to Chassidim, but just from the Hasidic books, this is what you will see, the teachings of this week's parsha. If you would open up the Hasidic books. And he said like this, because Sarah, unlike Avram, she's more in the world, like we spoke in the last few weeks, Sarah was the one who went the furthest. She went into the house of Paro, into the house of Abimelech. So because her job was to affect within the world, to make this world, because she's involved in the world, into a dwelling place for Hashem, in such a kind of world that we're turning to page 86. It's as low as it goes. There's nowhere lower than this world. It's like we're in the middle or towards the end. We're as low as it goes. And that idea that Sarah goes out to the world comes out in the idea of the life of Sarah specifically. Because the idea that we talk about, the completion of the avodah and Sarah, is because how far she goes. If we're talking about Avram is not so engaged in the world; he's beyond the world. Because Sarah is in the world, so someone may think, well, if I'm in the world, how could you expect me to be so complete? I'm constantly fighting battles within the world. Specifically because she's in the world, and that's why we say about her, she's the one who has the 127 years, to show that even if you're in the world and as low as you go, you're able to be a complete person. Out to the point that even her desires and her want is all complete. And that's why 100 me'ek, it says, me'eh shana, esim shana, v'sheva shanim. So to the lesson that we could take from Sarah. That where does the person have to find completion in their avoda is in the life of Sarah, life of our engaging in the world. Not to be complete in an isolated situation. If I isolate myself from the world, then I could be a complete person. But specifically in the world, Afka, Aidei Bechinas Sarah, the way Sarah was. Even as she was in the world, she was permeated and penetrated with all her the powers of her soul. She was complete as a complete person, while notwithstanding, and specifically as she's in the world. From this we can understand. That's why when we want to talk about the power of Sarah's completion, we talk about it in the beginning of a parsha that the entire rest of the parsha talks about after the life of Sarah. Why? If we want to say that Sarah's uniqueness is the hamshacha v'hapu'ula begidri oilam, how she's able to be within the world. Nimtza, turns out, shamita zainin the chayei Sarah hu kishiroim shagam la'achris talkusa me'al v'dein. Nimshachim kol inyon avedasa upulaska koidim. How do you know? What's the sign? I'm saying an amazing idea. What's the siman of her completion? Is not while she's alive. Because while she's alive, it's not, we don't know yet the effect. It's that even after she dies, we see the effect of her life. That's a sign of her completion. With more strength and emphasis than while she's alive. From this we could see that her service and her effect was in such a way that it affected the world, that she didn't have to be alive. Means the thinking, what the Rebbe is coming to say over here is that a person, while I'm alive, there's a lot of talk about Avram, that while he was alive, he was effective. But when he dies, they covered up all his wells. Sarah, how do we know that she's still alive? How do we know that she still lives, meaning she's still effective? Is how the world is going after she's alive. That she was able to affect the world so strong that even after she's passed, the world is still affected by the spirit and the thinking and the teachings of Sarah. The things about Sarah, the effects she had in the world, stayed and remained even after her death. And the Rebbe says, how do we see the effect of her life even after her death? We see it from the happenings of the parsha, and specifically Sarah's burial. The Rebbe is going to explain. And Yitzchak Rivka, the marriage of her son Yitzchak to Rivka. And how did that happen? Through Aidei Milish Lichus Shal Eliezer the Charin Kidlakamon, by Eliezer going to Charin. The Rebbe is saying, so why do we say that this is the life of Sarah? We talk about the completion of her life before we talk about after her life, to show that how do we know that she was complete? Because of what happens after she lived. And where do we see this specifically? We see this in the burial of Sarah and in the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, and the Rebbe will explain. Kfura Sarah, what do we see in the burial of Sarah? What does it say? It says, Vatamas Sarah b'Kiris Arba. Where does she die? She dies in the city Kiris Arba. And where's Kiris Arba? The Torah tells us, it's Chevron. In continuation to this, we learn, it says, V'yakom Avron, V'ydarba b'nei Ches. So Avram goes, and he goes to the people of Ches, who then lived in Chevron. And he says, Tnuli achuzas kever. Give me this portion that I could bear of this place to bury my loved one. Shmu'uni v'upigali be'Ephraim and Tzachar. Introduce me, please, to Ephron, who owned the Marasa Machpelah. V'yitin li'as Marasa Machpelah. Let him give me this cave to bury my Sarah. V'sima, and you know what happens after the whole conversation, as we all know. V'yishkal Avram le'Ephron. So Avram, after they agreed on a price, so Avram weighs out to Ephron, means he hands him as a kesef, the money, what they agreed, which is Arba Mea Shekel Kesef, the 400 coins, silver coins, over the Seicher, not just any coins, but coins that were able to be used in any kind of currency, as international currency. And then after he paid and they negotiated and he paid, Yaakov stay Ephron, and then Avram takes ownership of the field. And the cave that's there. Avram, and it belongs now to Avram, the Mikne Le'enei Bnei Ches, as he purchased in front of the eyes of Ches, v'achar and only afterwards, cover Avram es Sarah v'ishtay Yamar Stei HaMachpelah al Pnei Mamre hi Chevron Beretz Canaan. Only after he buys, negotiates, pays full price, does he bury Sarah in that place. So what do we learn from this? V'nimsa turns out like this: Shemisa Sarah she'az hutzach Avram liknes achuzas kever Beretz Canaan. Only after Sarah dies does he have to buy. Actually, this is the first place we find that he actually buys an ownership of land in Eretz Canaan. So what happens? So if you look at it, when do the Jewish people by Avram start conquering Eretz Yisroel, which was what was the message to Avram from Lech Lecha, and actually happens completed when the Jewish people entered the land after in Egypt. Well, but when did it start? It started with the first purchase of the land. What was that? Sarah's burial place. Even after God promised him that I gave you the land, so he has a promise from God. So maybe that's already the acquisition. That not only I'm going to give, I gave. Nasati means I gave, etin means I will give. So God said, I gave the land to your descendants. All the 10 lands. Eser Umayis, the 10 lands. And not just that Avram was told that I'm giving and I gave the land of the 10 nations. We've conquered 7, 3 are still to be included in Eretz Yisrael with the coming of Mashiach. But he gave all 10 nations, and then God told Avram to walk the land. What was the idea of walking the land? That was a way of acquisition, of ownership. He walked the land in order to acquire it. So seemingly he already did acquisitions and he had a promise from God. So why are we saying the first real conquering of the land is with the death of Sarah and the buying of her burial place? Mikolmak, the Rebbe says, that was a conversation between God and Avram. And Avram walked the land. So he walked the land. But that doesn't tell us that the world doesn't know that. When does the world know that Avram was starting to buy the land? Is when he bought a plot for Sarah. But when Sarah passes away, and like we say, we're seeing the effect of Sarah. Because Sarah again is affecting, hold on, Aaron. Sarah again is affecting the in the world, not just something private that Avram hears from Hashem. Hold on, I'm going to say the paragraph, then you'll ask your question. Sarah, when Sarah dies, when does the world see that the Jewish people are starting to conquer the land of Eretz Yisrael with Sarah's passing? So her passing starts the acquisition of Eretz Yisrael in front of the eyes of all the Bnei Ches, and it was a public information. Because in order to bury her, because she passed and she needed a place to bury, he goes and he buys in Hebron. Everyone sees it, right? The Torah closes clearly. It wasn't a private acquisition that he did with Ephron in his office. It was public. The whole city's there watching this store, this that he acquired and he bought the land. Yes, sir.
This is before we got the Torah, right?
Yeah, yes, of course.
So then he said that Hashem said he gives him the land because he conquered it, and then he bought some land. So why did they make us go backwards and go to Egypt?
It's a very good question. But in order to have the land in a way of a Torah land, in order to receive Torah, they had to go through Egypt. Now we'll learn in the Hasidic talks when we get to the parsha of the parak of Shemos and further in the end of Bereshis. But the idea is basically, in order for us to become a nation, not as an individual of Avram, but a nation, it's easy to have a couple that are dedicated to God. But to be a nation dedicated to God, we had to go through the process of Egypt. So that was part of the process of acquiring the land in a way of Torah. So the Rebbe says like this: and because it was done publicly and he purchased it and everyone saw, no one could say lar, no one could call foul. And they can't even say he ripped off Ephron. He paid him full price, more than full price. He paid him a very handsome amount. There's 3 places our rabbis teach us that the nations can't tell us that we don't have ownership. And although all 3 places they do tell us. What are these places? Maras Machpelah is one of them. Why? Because it says clearly, Vayishma Avram El Ephron, Vayishkal Avram Lefron. What do you mean? How could you say we don't own Hebron? We own Hebron. Avram paid for it. And he buried his wife there, and he buried Yitzchak there, and he buried Yaakov, and Yaakov was buried there. And with the descendants of Yaakov. And the other 2 places is of course Yerushalayim and Shechem, I think. Benimsa. So what do we see again? That what Avram is promised in a private conversation to God, even in his journeys, no one knows necessarily why he's traveling the land. It seems like things were happening in general in those days. Kings were falling and coming and going. Whatever. Avram was and he was talking about Yiddishkeit. No one knows that he's going to acquire the land. But it doesn't say that he was walking around with a sign saying, I'm acquiring the land. But Sarah, with Sarah's life, that's her whole life. Her whole life is not just to be an idea, but to be in the world. And therefore, right away, immediately with her death, we start acquiring the land. Starting to conquer the land. That's why when we want to talk about the life of Sarah and her effect, we see it again in her burial. That again, her effect starts the conquering of Eretz Yisrael. So that's the Kfura. What about the continuation of the parsha of the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka? Why does that have to do with the life of Sarah? So Nisui Yitzchak and Rivka, the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, Heicham Esipur Shlichus Shel Eliezer starts with Eliezer's mission, means he was sent by Avram to go find a wife for Yitzchak. So it says like this: B'nisui Yitzchak v'Rivka bali de bitei pulasa shel Sarah bileidas Yitzchak chinoichai ba'ofen shel hemshech v'kim nitzchei b'olam. So it's like this: B'nisui Yitzchak v'Rivka, when Yitzchak and Rivka get married, so it comes out the effect of Sarah having Yitzchak. Meaning Yitzchak again. Yaakov, Avram says that Yishmael live. Hashem says no. Sarah needs to have a child, and his name is going to be Yitzchak. Your descendants come from Yitzchak. So where does Yitzchak's continuation, who Sarah had Yitzchak, where do we continue this having her son? Is when her son gets married. That gives him more. That means if he doesn't get married, what's going to be with the continuation of the Jewish people, right? If he was an old bachelor at 40 years old. So if he's not going to get married, then what's the point of Yitzchak? Yitzchak is so he should be that this is the nation of Israel. So Eretz Yisrael. So they had it of the people of Yisrael. So Bnei Yisrael. So how do we make sure that happens? He has to get married. When Yitzchak brings his wife Rivka into his mother's tent, like Rashi says, that he sees in her behaviorism and her effect that she's just like his mother. The blessing in the bread, the blessing in the candles, the blessing in the tent. And then only afterwards, when we see the children of Yitzchak. That's going to learn about next week in the Parsha. As we read in Mincha, is and so that is the promise. Not just the promise, but we're actualizing the promise. Again, bringing it down into action, into reality, into the world by Yitzchak getting married. That your children, that you're going to have many children, and that blessing is through Yitzchak, is going to happen via the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka. Claimer, the Rebbe says like this, meaning to say, to put it more simply, what does it mean the life of Sarah? Meaning to say that to represent what she's done in this world, how she affects the world, and her effect is everlasting. Doesn't wear off, because how do we know your influence is how you're influencing when you're no longer here? Then you know that your influence is a real influence. First of all, that she has to have children. If she doesn't have children, so how could you continue the legacy of Sarah? Sarah like God tells Avram, Sarah needs to have a child. It's not about you. Avram says, I have a child. It's about you. Sarah needs to have a child. And the covenant that I'm promising you is the son you're going to have with Sarah. Yitzchak. Well, I call Yitzchak Yaakov. And like it says, not just all of Yitzchak. Yitzchak's descendant Yaakov. It says Bi Yitzchak, from within Yitzchak. If we would say Kol Yitzchak, it would be all the descendants of Yitzchak, which would include Esav. Because the pasuk says Bi Yitzchak, means from Yitzchak you're going to have another grandson, i.e. Yaakov, not Esav, and that's going to be the continuation of the legacy of Avram and Sarah. Yikar l'chazara. Asher inin zebali they bitu b'poyel mamish b'nisui Yitzchak v'Rivka. And how do we have? Obviously grandchildren, you have to have marriage. Chayei zen, that's the nachas, right? What's the nachas of parents? It's to know that their children get married in the continuation of the legacy. Chayei zen nasakim dam Yisrael chol, and that's why the Jewish people are here for the rest of the generations. Therefore, the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, although it happens, the whole story happens. Rivka is only born after, right before she dies, is happens after the death of Sarah. But that's the life of Sarah. What's the life of Sarah? The life of Sarah is the continuation of her legacy. And what's that legacy? That's the legacy of Yitzchak and Rivka, and through Yaakov. Skip something here? Page 88. Again, what could we take from this today? 2024, 5,785. Right? So many years after the story. What does this mean to us? The Rebbe's like this. Aside from what we said before, that the first lesson that we said initially, that we all have to have completion, like Sarah had completion in her years. We have to have completion in our years, not just in our years, but in our days and our actions throughout the days. Not just in our actions, but penetrated by our desire, want, intellect, and emotions. Like the life of Sarah of 127 years. 100 is the Ratzon and Tainug is the desire and the want, and the 20 is the intellect, and the 7 is the attributes, is the midos, is the characters of the midos, of the emotions. Is more than that. We have to look at, just like we're saying that, how do we know her effect, the effect of Sarah? We said about the two major things, which was in her burial that started the conquering of Eretz Yisroel, and then the legacy of a continuation of her life through the marriage of Yitzchak and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka. That has to be a lesson also to us today. Meaning to say like this: Aleph, try to get as far as we can in this idea. Number one is we have to take a lesson from the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka and how it came about through Eliezer. Means, how did they get married? Avram didn't say there's a young woman called Rivka, go bring her back. There's a challenge to find Rivka. We said before, that a person, we know that every person is a shliach, is an emissary of God. Like it says, the emissary is like the person who sends you, right? You're now empowered. You're talking in the name of the person who sent you, like Eliezer says, Eved Avram Anechi, I'm a servant of Avram. And what is our mission? What makes us a shliach? We're God's emissary to make this world into a dwelling place for Hashem. If we want to know and analyze, how do we fulfill our job as shluchim, as God's emissaries in this world, to make this world into a dwelling place for God, is look at the first appointment of a shliach, a person who was sent as an emissary in the Torah, which was Eliezer was sent as an emissary with a job to go find Rivka. When Avram sent Eliezer, his servant, as a messenger and as a shliach and as an emissary, about the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka. And that brought to marriage. And what's the point of marriage? It's is to be fruitful and multiply and conquer the world. Conquer the world by bringing people to the world, that everyone, your descendants, go out to the world and continue in your ways to conquer the world and make the world as a dir b'tachtonim, a dwelling place for Hashem. Told us Yitzchak, this is the descendants of Yitzchak, the actions, the life of Yitzchak. Yitzchak yikar l'chazar. You want to know what your children are, who's going to carry on your life's mission? That's Yitzchak. Which means our job to go out in the world and make the world into a dwelling place for Hashem. What's this mean actually? Into what do we have to actually do? Everyone has to do, every individual, not someone else, you. Go out there, be fruitful and multiply. It's a shidduch, just like Eliezer was sent on a mission to make happen the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, through that having children and people out in the world who are affecting the world. Both children beruchnius, Yedua Piskim, like the previous Rebbe says, what is the first commandment in Torah that God tells Adam and Eve? Is pru'revu, be fruitful and multiply. Mashmusa, that means shekol Yehudi tzarich lasis oid Yehudi. What does that mean? Not just to have children physically, but every Jew has an obligation to make another Jew. We're not talking about in conversion. We're talking about the karvei l'Torah mitzvahs. Bring that person, he or she, back to Torah mitzvahs. Kamayim Razal, as our rabbis have taught us, kol amid lamed ben chaveri Torah. If a person teaches another person Torah, God considers as if you've given birth to that person because you've brought Torah into that person's life. Shenemer, as it says, Be'ela told us Aaron and Moshe. When we talk about the children, we say these are the children of Aaron and Moshe, and then it says, who are these children? Be'ela Shmais b'nei Aaron. But we're only talking about Aaron's children. So why do we say these are the children of Moshe and Aaron? They're just the children of Aaron. Aaron Yoladu Moshe Limud, because Aaron gave birth to them. But Moshe taught them. So therefore, they're also considered Moshe's children. The Fikach Nichra Shemai, therefore those are called in Moshe's name. Hold on a second. So therefore, we have to go out there and we have to make children, spiritual children in this world, bring them to Torah mitzvahs. And to what extent do we have to go out to the world? How much is expected of us? You're not just going to nice places. You go into a place like Choron, is where Eliezer went. Choron is an angry place. God's anger in the world, if you want to say that, where is it expressed? In the place where Eliezer went to find a wife for Yitzchak. That Choron means anger. You couldn't find a lower place. Why do you go to Choron to find a Jew? To affect on that Jew, not just that Jew should come back and should go back to Torah mitzvahs, but that Jew should be fruitful and multiplied. That Jew should go out there and affect another Jew. It has to have a ripple effect. Why are you investing in order for it to come out? So the next person doesn't just become a good Jew, but that person becomes a good Jew and learns from his or her teacher and goes out there and brings other Jews back. Until the end of the world. Yes, Aaron.
I just see things or hear things from you, and we'll make sure I'm hearing it right. But this is what I think where the Chabad, your Lubavitch got the movement to go out.
Sure, the first shliach was Avram and Sarah. It says like this, Beis. That's one thing. Thank you for that, Aaron. Number two, the effect in the world. Means one is there's two things. One is to bring Torah to have children, and to bring people back, spiritual children and physical children. The next thing is how you affect the world. Go out there and refine and affect your place of influence. What's Chelka B'Olam? The places that you have an ability to have influence. To make your place of influence. 89, Eretz Yisroel. You have to make it the land of Eretz Yisroel. You like the Rebbes used to talk about the Tzemach Tzedek's line, Machta Eretz Yisroel. We can make Eretz Yisroel. Every place in the world has. What does it mean, Eretz Yisroel? Eretz Yisroel means this is a godly place. And like Sarah did in her death, and through her death they started to purchase land in Eretz Yisrael. Like it says in this week's parasha, when we're talking about the details of the marriage or the Eliezer's job to find a wife for Yitzchak, it says what do they say to her? That your children should inherit all their enemies. And when did it start? That we start to conquer the land, that it was in a revealed way. It was with the death of Sarah when Avram bought Moras HaMachpelah, the place of her burial. Both in affecting people and in affecting acquiring Eretz Yisrael, making the world into a holy place. We don't do it casually. We don't do it forcefully. It penetrates our entire being. That our 100, which is, we said, Tainug and Ratzain, our want and our pleasure, and our 20, which represents our intellect, and our 7, which represents our emotional makeup, is all invested and complete in making this world a dwelling place for Hashem, making the Machta Eretz Yisrael. And also in the physical sense, bringing Eretz Yisrael back. When a person is going to do the avoid in such a way, it's bevade that Rebbe says, absolutely, I'm sure, we will be successful. Not only that, we're not going to be fighting, but if you have the right attitude, and you're not putting halfway in there, you're putting in your 127 years, means your full being. So there, Yisroel says, you're going to see the world is going to help you. What are the sons of Ches say to Avram? You're a prince amongst us. And then we see also it says that he was able to jump through the whole land. The Rebbe says that's indicating kind of an ownership of the land by jumping in to get to Rivka. Let's go a little further. We have a few more minutes. So the Rebbe says like this: if we're already talking about Avram Avinu buying the land of Hebron for Sarah, we have to point out again the everlasting ownership the Jewish people have on Eretz Yisrael. When we want to speak to the nations about Eretz Yisrael, this is the Rebbe's shita, the Rebbe's opinion, and it never changed. When someone asks you, what's your connection to Eretz Yisrael? You live in Seattle, you live in New York. Who gives you a right to have an opinion about Eretz Yisrael? Who gives you an opinion to live in Eretz Yisrael? The Rebbe says the emphasis has to be again and again, one line. Eretz Yisrael hi nachlas olam. Eretz Yisrael was given to the Jewish people as an everlasting inheritance, la'am olam, to an everlasting nation. Melekei Olam, from an everlasting God. Api Mashakasif B'Teres Olam, where it says in an everlasting Torah. Sheba Ma'aminim Gam Umas Olam, and a lot of the nations of the world also are Bible-believing people. And there clearly, Shakadosh Baruch Avtiach Avram. What does it say in the Bible and the Torah? That God promised to Avram, Bebris ben Absarim, in the covenant, to your descendants I have given this land from where Minar Mitzrayim, from the Nile River, Adnar Gadol Pras, to Euphrates River. That's what it says. Asakeni v'Aknizi v'Kitmani, all the 10 nations. Eser Umas. V'Tzaynei Notlai. Hey, Ariel, V'Tzaynei Notla Mihem, like Rashi says, when he wanted to, he took it away from the nations. Heichel Michevron, when did it start? When Sarah's passing, actualizing that Avram acquired Chevron. Shekana Avram Avinu b'Kesef Mal, and he paid full price. V'Kana Makom Lahaskin. Here's the Rebbe says we have to add again. Sheyeshle Misha Emer Dvar Manam Bli Lispal Mumas Olam. There are people that say this without being overwhelmed, not letting the voices, the rhetoric of the nations to dissuade them of your confidence in saying that we own Eretz Yisrael. The Ashri Chelke, the Rebbe says, those who are strong, praiseworthy. And hopefully they're going to stay strong in this way. And the Rebbe says that you should not be overwhelmed. From the worldliness. Goyishkeit is, the Rebbe talk about goyim and goyishkeit. There's this idea of not being affected by the nations and not being affected by the nation's rhetoric. Goyishkeit is the talk, the attitude. Shenishra adayin eitzel misay misper misrael shepoichnen leimer dvarim kavyasem, but there's still those who are scared to say things the way they are. Oidis balusim habal odis shal Yisrael al Eretz Yisrael. That people feel uncomfortable to say our ownership of Eretz Yisrael. And it's not because of this war or that war that happened 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago. It started when God promised to Avram. So he says that how do we show our ownership of Eretz Yisrael is in our behavior in general through Torah mitzvahs. And also the connection of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, through Eretz Yisrael. The Rebbe says clearly, I'm going to finish over here. When you talk straight and with the right confidence, with Jewish respect and a straight back, you're not coming with your own ideas. Torah says so, and the power of Torah. The Rebbe says surely that you're going to be effective. Even if the nations don't seem to be accepting, if you talk strong, you talk direct, they will. And also the Jewish people have to accept it themselves. That we should be victorious over all obstacles. That the idea Yisrael, why we called it's not called Eretz Yaakov. It's called Eretz Yisrael because the idea of Yisrael is Kisarisa imelikim v'manushim atuchal. You are a master over God, over the angels, and over man, and you are effective. V'tuchal, he was effective. Even the level of Yaakov within the Jew, Milashin Ekev in the heel. Hamikivan sheyesh by v'hu harosh d'shmoi yud Ekev, because the name Yaakov has a yud first. Nikudas ayadis, and the yud of Ekev of the heel, even if we're feeling like not a head, but we're feeling like a foot or the heel of the foot. But the beginning of the name is Yaakov, and the yud represents the spark that every Jew has, no matter what their situation is, with the spark of godliness. Azai Yaakov halach the darkei. So even Yaakov, even if you're not feeling like Yisrael, you're feeling like Yaakov, but Yaakov walks on his way. He meets the angels of God. Both the angels of Eretz Yisrael and the Eretz and the angels of Chutz La'aretz. I'm going to stop over here, everyone, but the message is clear, both in what we have to do in the world and both how our attitude has to be in Eretz Yisrael, and how important does this conference have to be in today, in the times that we're living in and the situations that we're living in, especially what happened today in international courts, open anti-Semitism, and I don't mind saying that. So we should be Matzliach, Yad Yisrael al Yayna, like it always will be. We should have confidence in Mishsi Mashiach B'Karev. Laila Tov, everyone, and good Shabbos.
Baruch Hashem. Laila Tov, Rabbi. Good Shabbos, everybody.
Good Shabbos.